Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Schulte, and I'm very honored to welcome you all on behalf of the North Korea Freedom Coalition to today's panel. It's a wonderful message of encouragement to the people of North Korea that you're here today. Your presence means so much to us and our brave witnesses, Ms. Park and Ms. Kim, who you're going to hear from in just a moment. And it means a lot to the people of North Korea, because we also have representatives from Free North Korea Radio present today who will be broadcasting about this panel into North Korea, so that the people of North Korea know how much care and concern we have for them. They'll know that you were here today in New York City at the UN Commission on the Status of Women because you cared about the women of North Korea. Now, our coalition is dedicated to promoting the freedom, human rights, and dignity of the North Korean people, and we welcome anyone who's interested in those same goals to join in our efforts. It's taken many decades for the international community to recognize the gravity of the human rights violations occurring in North Korea every day. It's the bravery of North Koreans who've escaped, just like most of them are women, just like the women you're going to hear from today, that finally there's no doubt that the Kim regime is committing gross violations of human rights every day and unspeakable atrocities. And in fact, the UN Commission of Inquiry of Crimes Against Humanity in North Korea concluded in February 2014 that the violations of human rights in North Korea have no parallel in the world. So this theme for this year's UN CSW is, as you know, social protection systems, access to public services, and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We selected our two special witnesses today to provide you evidence that there are absolutely no social protection systems in North Korea to provide for or protect women and girls. Because we want you to hear from them as much as possible, I'm going to just briefly describe their backgrounds and then turn the program over to them. First, Ms. Kim Hae-suk. She was in fact sent to a political prison camp with her entire family when she was a teenager. The family had no idea what crimes they committed for many years until they found out it was because her grandfather had fled to South Korea. She is the longest survivor of a North Korean political prison camp, having spent 28 years of her life in Camp 18, where she suffered many violations of human rights and witnessed the death of nearly all her family members. When she was finally released, she ended up being sold to work, she ended up being sold to work in China at a restaurant, but was arrested and repatriated in North Korea only to be sent back to prison. She eventually escaped, and again, she made it to South Korea in 2009. Mrs. Kim's life is a stark illustration that women in North Korea from childhood to adulthood have no human rights and have no human rights protections. Now, our second witness, Ms. Park, is from a small town on the border of North Korea and China. She graduated from a teaching university and spent 6 years as a teacher before she escaped from North Korea in 2008. Her testimony today will illustrate from her own life's experiences the fact that not only are there no social protection systems in North Korea, but even the legal system is not there to protect women and girls. The legal system is actually there to surveil and exploit and abuse the citizens of North Korea, especially the women. We will have our two witnesses speak, and then we will open up the floor for any questions that you may have. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Kim Hae-suk to come forward, and Ms. Kang-sa is going to translate for her.
Hello, my name is Kim Hae-suk. I'm a North Korean director.
저는 평양시 모란봉 무역 전신동에서 태어나서 평양에서 잘 살고 있었다가 1975년 2월 이도 모른 채 평양남도 북창군 서재 18호 관리소에 들어가서 온 28년 동안 수감 생활을 한 사람입니다.
I was born in the Moranbong district of Pyongyang and had a very good life in my younger age. But in February of 1975, without giving any notice or any reason, my whole family was sent to a political prison camp number 18, which is located in Gukchang, Pyongyang province, where I spent the next 28 years of my life.
13살 때 들어갔는데 그때 당시 관리소에서는 그 중학교 4학년까지 만 16세까지만 공부시키고 그 이후로는 탄광에 배치시켜서 하루에 8시간 내지 그 16시간 이렇게 종로동을 해왔습니다.
I was only 13 years old, and they put me in a school for 3 years so that I could finish the middle school program. And from the age of 16, I started to work at the coal mine. The provision regulated that each worker should work up to 8 hours a day, which was hardly kept, as I was forced to do 10 to 14 hours of hard labor. I worked at the coal mine for 14 years.
저는 14년 동안 한강에서 일했고 그때 아버지는 군사복무 10년을 하고 그 갑자기 이유도 모른 채 관리소에 끌려 들어가니까 죄인으로서 내가 왜 이런 데서 살아야 되냐 이렇게 물어본다고 해서 그 보이지 않는 보이부 관리소에 끌려 들어간 지 그 이제는 40년이 넘도록 아직 이 그 행방을 모르고 아직 있습니다.
I worked at the coal mine for 14 years, and during that time, I lost my parents in the political prison camp. My father, who served in the military for 10 years, confronted the authorities in the camp and asked him why his whole family was sent to the political prison camp, even though they didn't commit any crime. The authorities took him away, and I haven't seen him since for 40 years now.
그래서 아버지가 잡혀간 이후에는 어머니가 그 생계를 유지하면서 살면서 그 산에 가서 먹을 것이 없어서 나무를 듣다가 벼랑에서 떨어져서 그 자리에서 돌아가셨습니다.
My mother, who was suffering from starvation, went up to the mountain to pluck some grass, but later she lost her steps and fell off from the cliff.
저는 그때 집안이 어형제인 맞이로서 가족의 생계를 유지하면서 그 탄광에서 그 일을 했습니다.
As the oldest daughter of 5 children, from then on I had to take care of my siblings working at the coal mine.
관리소에서도 그 탄광에 들어가면 그 영양제라는 것을 그 알랑리가 조금씩 줬습니다. 근데 저는 그때 그것을 먹질 못하고 단 한 번도 그거를 제가 먹어본 적이 없고 그것을 비닐봉지에 싸서 집에 가져가면 거기다 물을 넣고 이렇게 해서 미용식으로 써먹으면서 온 생계가 고기 달라붙어서 우리가 생계를 유지했습니다.
While I was working in the coal mine, authorities provided a small portion of food to me, but I never took it for myself. I always brought it back home and mix it with water to make a thin porridge, so that we can feed my sibling and my grandmother, so that we could all survive.
관리소에서는 여자는 28세, 남자는 30세가 되면 결혼을 승인하는데 나이가 됐다고 해서 다 승인하는 것은 아니고 10년 동안 단 한 번의 결석과 지각 없이 정말 당에 충실하는 그런 사람들을 몇 명만 선발해서 시범으로 결혼을 승낙해줍니다.
In the Kwaliso, the Korean name for a political prison camp, when the inmates reached to a certain age, which was 28 for women and 30 for men, the authorities gave permission for them to get married. But now all the people in the age could get married. Among those who have skipped the work for 10 years and were acknowledged as loyal to the Workers' Party, only a few were selected to get married as an example.
그런데 아기는 많이 나라고 하는데 그게 탄광에서 한 사고가 일어나니까 일꾼이 없어서 일꾼을 양성하는 식으로 아기를 많이 나라고 하는데 그 산모들이 복지를 못하고 조지 안 나오니까 배국으로는 통강냉이를 준단 말입니다. 옥수수 알, 그거를 물에다 끓였다가 이불을 집씹어서 이렇게 해서 옥수수 줄을 쑥 먹이면서 아기를 키우고 있었습니다.
Once they get married, then the authorities encourage them to give birth to children as many as possible, because it was a coal mine. Because many of the accidents happened, so many people died. So these children will become also, when they grow up, become workers in the camp. However, because of the malnutrition, mothers cannot produce enough breast milk to feed their babies, so the babies are rarely grow healthy. The most common distribution in terms of food in the camp was raw corn. So mothers often soak the corns in the water, made porridge up with it, and chew the porridge to make it softer and easier for their babies to swallow.
또 기저귀가 없어서 이렇게 비닐방막을 깔고 밤에는 재우고 낮에는 그 옷이 없으니까 빨간 벗어서 밖에 내다 넣는데 그 햇빛에 물을 담아가지고 놔뒀다가 저녁에 씻으면 비누가 없으니까 그래도 지워지고 그 다음에 비누를 대용해서 쓰는 것은 이건 눈 오는 거 하고 빗물 받으면 그거는 저녁에 이렇게 때가 씻혀져요. 비누가 없어도.
There was no diaper, so I had to make my own diaper with a vinyl sheet. And there were no clothes for children, so I had to leave my child bare naked to play outside. And there was no soap, so in the morning I always drew the water and left it during the day, or I often use rain or even snow so that I could wash my children with lukewarm water later on.
그래서 이렇게 하면서 초등학교는 죽고 딸 하나, 아들 하나를 키웠습니다.
I gave birth to 3 children, but I lost one, my longest one, and this is how I raised my last 2 children in the camp.
제가 1993년 그때 91년 그때 5월 14일 제가 첫 아기를 날 때는 진짜 제가 여기들 앉아 계시는 분들과 어머니, 아빠, 어머니가 계시겠지만 저는 그때 그 만삭이 뭔가 그 관리소에서는 식량이 부족하니까 그 도리나무 잎사귀를 많이 먹습니다. 그래서 그날도 저는 그 배낭 크다만 거를 쥐고 그 다음에 거자기를 가지고 그 산에 가서 도리나무 잎사귀를 가득 뜯어갖고 지금 안고 이렇게 내려다가 산에서 출산했습니다.
On 1991, May 13th of 1991, the day I gave birth to my first daughter. On the day I actually went up to the mountain wearing my backpack so that I could pluck some oak tree sprout for food because there was a constant shortage of food in the camp. There I gave birth to my daughter on my way back from the mountain.
그때 저는 갑자기 아기가 나오니까 그 산에서 아기를 낳았어요. 아기가 계속 나왔는데 그 만삭이었던 배가 갑자기 아기가 나오니까 일어서질 못하겠어요. 그래서 그 엎드린 상태에서 그 배낭에서 도토리 잎사귀를 다 꺼내고 그 배낭에다가 아기하고 그 태반하고 싸가지고 애기 조금 밀고 나도 이렇게 조금 기고 애기 또 조금 밀고 그 애기 머리를 기면서 이렇게 하다가 그 어떤 할아버지가 그 산에 용서목이라 올라오다가 만나서 그분의 도움을 해서 집에까지 데려왔습니다.
I didn't have anything but my backpacks to wrap my infant baby, and I just gave birth to a child, so I couldn't stood up. So I wrapped my daughter with my backpack and also oak tree sprouts that was filled with my backpack. And there's no one around who could help me, so I could barely walk. So I crawled down the mountain, pushing the backpack forward slowly, and also my baby slowly. Fortunately, I met an old man who came up to the mountains to feed his animal soon after, so he helped me to get home.
이렇게 출산해도 병원이라는 걸 가보지 못하고 마을 사람들이 도움으로 할머니들이 도움으로 태반을 끊고 그 태반은 핀을 조금 빼고는 썰어가지고 볶아서 그게 고기가 없으니까 그래도 그거는 산 것도 먹지 못하고 자기 남편은 그걸 볶아서 고기처럼 먹었어요.
There was absolutely no support or medical service provided for this infant baby or a new mother. So when I got home, my neighbors helped me to recover from the delivery. And actually, I wrapped my placenta that I came out from my body with my baby. So when I got home, the food shortage in the camp was so severe, and we hadn't seen any meat in a long time. So when I got home, I take that out placenta and then punch the holes on it, so it could be I could drain the blood out and wash it several times. And I cook it and fed my own husband.
저희 남편은 또 한강에서 일하다가 그마저도 돌아갔고 저는 남편 대신 그 건설 사업소에 있는 그 사업소에 배치받아가지고 기하반장으로 일하면서 부모들한테 받은 게 아무것도 없으니까 개, 돼지, 토끼를 기르면서 이 길러가지고 당뇨에 다쳐가지고 제가 그 모범적으로 생활을 했습니다.
But my husband passed away due to this accident in the coal mine a couple of years later. After having children, I was assigned to the construction division within the camp, and where I could raise hogs, dogs, and rabbits. But those are not mine because I was a criminal. I couldn't keep any possession. So I worked really hard to take care of those livestock.
정말 사람도 먹을 게 없는 그 속에서 돼지, 개 이런 거를 짐승을 기른다는 것은 정말 힘든 일입니다. 그리고 북한에서는 여성들이 그 생리를 하면 그 생리대가 없으니까 손 같은 거, 어깨전 같은 거를 갖다가 그거를 더운 물에 빨아가지고 몇 번을 빨아가지고 그 핏물로 그 도토리나무 잎사리나 풀 좀 넣어서 돼지를 먹이면 그 사람 피라서 그 돼지들이 잘 크거든요. 그래서 그렇게 기르면서 저희가 긍정적인 일을 많이 한 것으로 인해서 2001년 김정일 그 생일 맞으면서 제가 해제를 받았습니다.
The experience in the political prison camp as a woman was just miserable. When I first had my period in the age of 19, I had to use a rag as a sanitary pad, and we couldn't even waste the water we washed the blood from that pad. We were told to give that water to the hogs we were raising because it was believed to be very beneficial to the animals. So this is how I took care of my livestock really well, and it gave hundreds of them to the party. All of this hard work finally paid off. So in 2001, I was released from the camp.
그래서 저는 해제를 받으면 우선 그 관리소에서 해제 민증을 바꿔주고 그다음에 이것을 가지고 그 안전부에 가면 우리 가족, 친척들이 어디에 있는지를 다 알려줘요.
For those who are released, the party issues an identification of release. And when you bring that document to the Social Security Bureau, the equivalent of a police station in North Korea, in US, I'm sorry, they will tell you where your relatives live.
그래서 제가 살고 있는 곳에서 제일 가까운 곳은 그 큰아버지가 계시는 평안남도 해창군에서 살고 있다는 것을 알고 거기를 2001년 해제됐지만 그 해로 못 나가고 2002년 다음 해에 제가 8월달에 나갔어요. 그렇게 나가서 큰아버지를 만나서야 내가 이유도 모른 채 28년 동안 그 18호 관리소에서 살았던 이유를 제가 알게 되었어요.
I found out that my father's older brother was in Hwacheong of South Pyongyang province, so I went to meet him in August of 2002. He told me the reason why I had to live 28 years in the political prison camp.
그래서 그때 가서 내가 알게 된 내용은 할아버지가 6.25 때 한국으로 몰락했다고 하는 그런 내용인데 저는 그때 13살 때에 할아버지 얼굴도 이름도 모르는 채로 그 18호 관리소에 끌려 들어가서 28년 동안 거기서 살다 나와서 내가 이유를 알게 되었지만 아직 우리 동생 3명은 거기서 46년째 살고 있어요. 근데 아직 간에는 내가 여기서 왜 사는가 하는 이유를 모른 채 아직 살고 있어요.
Said it was because of my grandfather, my father's father, who were allegedly missing and fleeing to South Korea during the Korean War. I found out that is the only reason that I had to spend my 20 years of my life in political prison camp. And now I'm released from the political prison camp, and I found out about that reason. But I still have 2 brothers, younger brothers, still living in North Korea without knowing why they have to suffer so much for their lives.
그렇게 하면서 우리가 한강에서 일할 때에는 그 1년에 작업복 한 벌밖에 안 주거든요. 비누 같은 건 모르고 그러니까 얼굴이 새까맣고 이렇게 하면서 작업복은 너덜너덜하고 이런 채로 일하다가 제가 해제를 받았잖아요. 그래서 저는 갑자기 이거 홍수가 나가지고 애들을 2 아이를 잃고 이렇게 살아서는 안 되겠는데 2005년도에 중국으로 인신매매 그러니까 국경 경비대가 저를 중국에다 팔았어요.
In the camp, we were provided a pair of work clothes once a year which we have to manage where until we get a new one next year, whether they were worn out or look like a rag. So that's how I survived in the camp. After I was released, I was actually trafficked and sold to China in 2005.
그때 제가 중국에 팔려갔을 때 43살이었거든요. 그랬는데 나보다 먼저 온 27살 나는 처녀애들하고 23살 나는 처녀애들은 중국 돈 3만 위안에 그대로가 팔려갔어요. 근데 저는 그 43살, 47년 동안, 43년 동안 이게 스킨 노선 한 번 못 바르고 탄광에서 일하다 나니까 너무 많이 늙어 보인 거예요. 근데 글자, 중국 글자를 모르니까 이 손바닥에다가 산스치 이렇게 썼는데 이게 난 무슨 소리인지를 몰랐어요. 근데 한족들이 와서 제 사람을 사러 오거든요. 그때 와서 너 지생나 하면 산스치라고 말하라 그래서 산스치라고 그러니까 산스치는 무슨 산스치 그 우수치 그러니까 57도 넘어 보인다 그러면서 저를 안 사갔어요. 그래서 마지막에 중국 조선족은 이 사람한테 저를 3천 위안에 팔았는데 저를 도저히 3천 위안에 팔 수가 없어요. 너무 이게 많이 늙어 보이고 피부도 너무 한심하고 호약이 들어서 그때 내가 38kg 나간가 그래서 못 팔려갔어요. 그러니까 하고 며칠 만에 2,500 위안에 식당이 팔려갔댔어요.
When I was trafficked to China, I was actually 43 years old. And when broker took me to his house, I found out there were two younger ladies whose age was 27 and 23. They're already there. And I later found out that these young ladies were sold to Chinese men in 30,000 yuan later. And when broker took me to that house, actually she wrote a Chinese letter in my hand and told me how to read that. He actually wrote San Shu Qi, which means 37, and the broker told her, if someone asks you how old are you can just say San Shu Qi. And when the customer came to buy me, actually at that point, he asked him how old are you, so I told him I was 37 years old. And the customer answered, no, you don't look like 37 years old. You look like 57, so I'm not going to buy you. So that's how basically I ended up survive, because the broker actually bought me from the North Korean border guard in 3,000 yuan, but he cannot find anyone who could pay that kind of price to buy me. So he ended up sold me to a Chinese restaurant in 2,500 yuan.
그래서 식당에 팔려가서 일하다가 이게 말이 모르니까 2008년도에 잡혀서 북송되었어요. 그래서 북송돼가지고 저국에 6년 만에 다시 끌려 들어가니까 정말 저국 histor이 더 참혹했어요. 내가 그래서 내가 아이들도 없고 남편 없고 나 혼자서 이렇게 이런 데서 살아야 뭐할 일인가 그래서 다시 밤에 도망쳤어요. 그래서 2009년도에 중국으로 다시 군대도 하고 짜고 해서 넘어가고 가서 2009년도에 한국으로 오게 됐습니다.
I worked at the Chinese restaurant in 2008, and I was actually repatriated in 2008 and incarcerated in a labor training camp where I was forced to work in the name of washing my sins away. But at that point, I lost my two children, I lost my husband, so I felt there's no reason for me to stay here longer. So I managed to escape in 2009 to China and later came to South Korea.
그래서 이렇게 한국에 와서 저처럼 일을 하고 있지만 아직도 북한의 정치범 수용소 안에는 여성이나 아이들이 아이들에 대한 보호라는 것이 전혀 없고 그런 정말 철학한 의석에서 아직 살고 있습니다.
As you can see from my story, women and children in North Korea's political prison camp does not have any social protection and still living in a really dire situation.
지금도 수십만의 사람들이 그 안에서 죽어가고 있습니다. 옛날 때 김정일 정권 때 권한이 행동 때 300만이 아사자가 났잖아요. 그런데 지금은 그보다 더 심하니까 얼마나 많이 죽어가고 있겠습니까?
still thousands and thousands of people are still dying at this very moment in these camps. Actually, we said that about 3 million people died of starvation during the arduous march of Kim Jong-il's era. But I was told that the situation is getting worse now. So you can only imagine how difficult, hard it must be for North Koreans to survive.
독재 정권 아래서 고통받고 있는 우리 북한 주민들에 대한 관심을 여러분께서 지속적으로 가져주셨으면 주시기를 촉구드립니다. 그리고 28년 동안 살아온 제가 얘기를 이 짧은 시간에 다 어떻게 이야기를 하겠습니까? 그러나 그 짧은 시간이나마 내주셔서 감사드리고요. 또 뭐 질문이 있으면 질문에 제가 대답해드리는 그런 대답도 해드리겠습니다. 그러니까 여기까지 해서 해주셔서 들어주셔서 감사합니다.
So I urge you, all of you, would continue to pay attention to North Korean people who are suffering under brutal dictatorship. And it's really hard for me to summarize my experience in 28 years in political prison camp in such a short time. So I'll answer any of the questions that you might have during the Q&A session. So please ask me freely if you have any question. And thank you for listening to my story. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to meet you. I'm Miss Park. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to speak at such an important event. In addition, I would also like to thank you all very much for your concern for the human rights of North Korean women. Today, using my experience in North Korea as a basis, I want to speak realistically about the welfare system for women in North Korea. Today, I live in South Korea. In South Korea, the welfare system for defectors such as myself is very well developed. However, the North Korea in which I lived was not like that. Here, I will discuss a number of examples. This is a story about a family that lived in my neighborhood. There were 3 daughters in that household, and among them, the oldest daughter was tall, beautiful, and in the place of her aging parents, took responsibility for the welfare of the family. Her method for making money was using her good looks to form good relationships with well-known men and using their influence, learn a business. As a result of her efforts, the household was fed and lived well to an extent, but one day she was suddenly apprehended by the police. Her offense was running a business not authorized in North Korea, but we believed that they had arrested her because the police, for their own livelihood and promotions, would take money from average people when they needed it, and so they were doing it to her too. After being interrogated for days, we thought that she would get out by offering a bribe. However, an entire month passed and she was not released. After 6 months, she died as a result of an interrogation. The interrogations of criminals in North Korea often involve serious violence, and because of this, she was not able to overcome the interrogations. The police only sent a notice that she had died and did not even return her body. At that time, us villagers speculate that she may have been killed because she knew many influential people and of course also knew a lot about their corruption. The powerful in North Korea are regularly engaged in corruption, and I will discuss what sort of corruption they commit. In my village, there was a widow who lived on the second floor on an apartment building. She was raising a daughter in elementary school. Trade with China was her livelihood, and she would personally go to the border with China, and after conducting trade, would sell the hand over the goods to be sold. Of course, with only 2 months to feed, she had no great need for resources. So she not only made a lot of money, but because she was good looking, she became well known in our village. However, as she lived alone, strange men would come and go whenever she needed a man's help around the house. We thought that due to living alone, she just had a desire for men. However, one day, a security officer began to come and go from the house. At first, she visited on the pretext of controlling her illegal business with China. At the time, the man visiting the house ate well, had white skin, and was overweight. However, later she began to lose weight. His eyes became clouded, and anyone could see that he was on drugs. While on the drugs, he formed an inappropriate relationship with her and practically frequented from her house to the point where it seemed like he lived there. The villagers whispered, but because she was a high-ranking security officer, they could not speak publicly, and until the time I detected he was still doing drugs. The North Korean security officials are bad people and have greater regard for the lives of foreigners than for the lives of North Koreans. And when they interrogate a criminal, they typically show their inhuman attitude. Starting from the 90s, North Korean defectors who crossed into and lived in China but were later returned to North Korea were almost all women. If these women were repatriated, they would be sent back to their area of residence, where they would be tortured by the security officers. You could hear the cries of pain from the windows when they were tortured, including those who were pregnant. I once personally witnessed a male security officer use a belt to beat a woman without reason after making her take off her clothes. After many strikes, her back was covered in cuts and red sores. The agent grilled her, asking questions such as what kind of man she met in China and whether or not she slept with him. Questions that a woman might be embarrassed to answer. If she was too embarrassed and did not answer, she was beaten even harder. The security officers also took women who were pregnant to the hospital and forced them to have an abortion. Their justification for the abortion was that it was not right to give birth to a child that does not know their father. Postnatal care was inconceivable for women who received forced abortions, and they were taken back to prison. Lastly, I myself have personally experienced with the interrogation process, and I will talk about that experience now. Computers are still not very common in North Korea, and generally most people, even high-ranking people such as prosecutors, are computer illiterate and cannot even type. In North Korea, until the time I defected, all forms were written by hand, and they could be written by registrars with comparatively pretty handwriting. This was not a profession, and it was mostly done part-time. I did this work a number of times, and I helped a prosecutor I knew create records about interrogations. There was one file that contained detailed information about a woman who went to China and was sent back to North Korea. The record was filed with horrible questions asked by the prosecutor. What man did you meet in China? Was he South Korean? How did you meet him, and where did he work? These were all general questions, but they were related to later questions. Did you sleep with him? How many times? Did you live together? How many times did you have sex per day? Describe the sex in detail. When she mounted you, did he mount from the right or left? Was his penis large or small? These questions were meant to insult their humanity, as they were questions that women would not want to answer. My face turned red with embarrassment for this woman who had to answer all of these questions so that she would be beaten less. These sorts of details are not reported up the chain, but the fact that the security agent asked these questions to satisfy his own curiosity is an example of how evil the security officers could be. Through incidents like this and others, one can see how corrupt authority figures in North Korea are. In North Korea, women are also socially powerless. Shouldn't country take care of and look after the powerless? I want to stand on the world stage and blow the whistle on the North Korean elite who use their power as a weapon to harass and oppress women. It is bad to the point that so many women turned their backs on their beloved hometown and families to come to South Korea or the US. North Korea is and has long been a society made exclusively for the elite. My story today will not be a rash warning to the North Korean elites, but if everyone listens to the stories of defectors like me, then someday I believe that even North Korea can change. I ask for everyone's continued interest and support and ask that you please do not forget the people of North Korea. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to these brave women. It's because of the testimony of people like them who escaped from North Korea. That's why the UN Commission of Inquiry concluded that the human rights violations occurring in North Korea have no parallel in the modern world. It's because of their bravery that we have a greater understanding of what's going on in North Korea. Now we're going to open up the floor for some questions before we have our second panel. So if you want to just stand and ask any questions that you may have. I know North Korea has been in the headlines a lot recently. If you all have any questions for them, this is the time to ask. Yes, ma'am. I don't know if we have a mic back there, so just project, I guess.
Okay, I'll try. My name is Janice Alton, and I come from Canada. I'm with an organization called Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and I was a delegate on that 30-member women group that went to North Korea to walk across the demilitarized zone and to go into South Korea. And we met with some very interesting women in North Korea in that process. We were with them for about 6 days. And my question is, the women that we met with seemed to be highly connected, very personal, very personable, and I wondered if they were an avenue of help for you, or are they too alive to the government to be all considered?
These were when you met in Pyongyang, or where were you? Where were you staying in North Korea? This was
In Pyongyang.
in Pyongyang.
But
Yeah.
we were taken around.
So this is the Woman Cross DMZ.
Yes.
Ah, okay, I'm familiar with that. Come up here. Did each of them want to answer that question? Did each of them want to answer?
북한에서의 이제 변화는 그 어떤 이제 일 개인이 평양의 여자들하고 뭐 탈북자 여자들하고 연계해서 될 수 있는 그런 문제가 아니라고 일단은 생각을 하고 있고, 평양 같은 경우에는 또 이제 북한은 특별한 사람들만 살 수 있는 로열 패밀리들이 주로 살고 있는 이런 곳이라서 그 사람들이 이제 당국에 대한 이제 은혜를 또 많이 입기도 하고, 그래서 당국에 대한 그런 이제 보는 관점이 우리하고 다를 수가 있어요. 그래서 모르겠어요. 나중에 뭐 어떠한 기회가 돼서 그들을 만나가지고 해결할 수 있는 일이 있겠는지는 모르겠지만, 지금 봤었을 때는 이걸 해결할 수 있는 핵심 키는 북한 당국이 가지고 있어서 일개 북한 평양 주민이 나서서 되는 일은 아닌 것 같다고 생각합니다.
So it's a great idea to connect with defectors and women in Pyongyang together. But in order to induce real change in North Korea or pressuring the regime, we'll need more pressure or more other means to rather than like connecting women in Pyongyang and the defectors, because Pyongyang is a bit special city among North Korea. Well, only the elites, selected elites can live there, and probably the point of view they have, their opinion they have about the regime will be just totally different from what ordinary citizens, ordinary women in North Korea and other places would have. So there might be, it's not a, so the alliance between these two groups might not be a really effective way to change North Korea. The only way to bring the real peace to North Korea is change the regime, change the regime itself. But she's not sure. Ms. Park's not sure whether the alliance between the young women, the personal alliance between these women groups in Pyongyang and the defectors would bring a really good result to change the regimes.
Other questions? I was going to make a quick comment about that too, because just from my familiarity with the defectors, I did meet a young woman who had lived in Pyongyang, and she did not flee North Korea like so many because they were starving or because of human rights violations. She fled North Korea because her family had fallen out of favor with the party. They were among the elites in Pyongyang, and they had the means to be able to get out of North Korea and make it to Thailand to try to come to South Korea. While she was in Thailand, in a detention center with other North Korean women, she found out about what was happening to the other people in the country, and the trafficking and the starvation. But she had, because she lived in Pyongyang, she didn't want for anything. So there's a complete disconnect between people that live in Pyongyang and people that live outside of Pyongyang. But that's an excellent question to ask. I also want to tell you a quick story about a North Korean defector woman who made it to the United States and was settled here. There's not that many, I think we're 200, maybe 189 or something, but a small number that have actually, refugees from North Korea that have actually were settled in the United States. But her story really illustrated for me the mindset of what they go through. She opened up a bakery in a city in Virginia, and she tells a story about one of her first customers was a police officer. The police officer came in and ordered a cup of coffee, and so she very nervously hands him the cup of coffee, and the police officer goes to pay her, and she doesn't know what to do because she's like, I can't take the money, because she didn't realize the police officer was there to help her. And it just was like this moment where it was very confusing for her, because the police, so-called security, there are to surveil, to monitor, to persecute the people, the citizens. And so it was an interesting cultural thing for her to realize, oh no, he's not trying to steal from me or take from me. He actually wants the cup of coffee, and he's actually here to see how I'm doing. So anyway, it was kind of interesting because it's hard for us. We have so many freedoms, and we don't realize how isolated and how suffering the people of North Korea are. So, any other questions? Well, we do not. Oh, yes, ma'am.
반갑습니다. 감사합니다. 대단히 어려웠답니다. So my question is, please tell me what you think about China. Anything the men can do, government can do, women can do, anything is happening, China is supporting unification or freedom? Thank you.
중국은 우리 탈북자들이 중국을 걸치지 않으면 탈북을 못해요. 예. 그렇게 하고 국경연선에 있는 사람들은 어떻게나 중국에를 건너가서 식량 구해오고 이렇게 하는데 지금 김정은하고 시진핑하고 어쨌든 중국이 없으면 북한은 어떻게 살아갈 수가 없는 그런 데 처해 있는데 인권으로 놓고 말하면 또 우리 여성들을 이렇게 막 사고 팔고 강간하고 막 이렇게 하니까 중국을 잘 좀 어떻게 발동을 그렇다고 해서 임신매매가 없어질 것 같지는 않아요. 왜? 탈북 루트가 다 저기 중국을 걸쳐야만이 우리가 다른 데로 뭐 몽골로 가나 무슨 라오스로 가나 태국으로 가나 다 이런 통로가 열리거든요. 그렇게 해서 중국에 대해서 어떻게 생각하냐 하는 물으면은 좋기도 하고 나쁘기도 하고 왜? 탈북 루트는 거기로 되어 있으니까 또 브로커가 없어서도 안 되고 탈북자들을 우리가 이쪽으로 끌어내려고 한다면은 그러나 그 넓은 땅에서 지금도 아직 한 30만이 중국에 체류하고 있거든요. 한국으로 오지 못해서도 있고 그 다음에 팔려가서 애기도 낳고 하니까 그거를 갑자기 이렇게 분산하지 못하갔으니까 아직도 거기서 남아있는데 국제사회가 나서서 UN 이런 게라 나서서 임신매매를 없애라 사람을 팔지 말아라 이렇게 하면서 세계가 이거 UN이 이런 데서나 내리매길 수는 있지만 정부 이렇게 당국에서는 어떻게 할 수가 없는 일 같아요. 저 생각에는. 그렇지?
So China is just a really important factor actually in terms of North Korean issue. The only way that North Korean factor could defect, actually escape from North Korea, is through China. So, and also North Koreans are relying heavily on China in terms of provision of the food and everything, and doing the trade. And so without China, actually, North Korea, she believes that North Korea cannot survive with the help of China, with the support of China. But at the same time, human rights the trafficking is happening all around the country, especially in the border area, and also because of the defection route you have to go through to China in order to defect. So we have to really be really wise in terms of dealing with China. And there are about 300,000 people, North Korean refugees, still living in China. They cannot come to China, come to South Korea because they don't have financial resources. But at the same time, there are women who are sold to Chinese men and have a kid. So that actually hampers them to come to basically abandon their children and come to South Korea. So these are things that are happening in there. So we can just put pressure in China, just for everything, but it's more, she believes that it's more of a work of international community to come up with a really good solution to how to pressure on China, but at the same time how to work with China to solve this issue.
Mm-hmm.
We have time for one more question before we go to our second panel. And if you're not going to ask one, I'm going to ask one. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from South Korea, and I'm pleased to see you guys in Korea. And I wonder how's life when you start a new life in South Korea. What was the most difficult thing? And also, how do you think about the social protection in Korea? South Korea.
네. 한국에 처음에 왔을 때 다 영구임대 아파트 이런 데를 배치해줘요. 그래서 거기에 들어가면 뭐 한국 분이니까 잘 아시겠지만 1순위가 장애인, 그 다음에 2순위가 탈북자잖아요. 그래서 영구임대 아파트를 들어가요. 근데는 그 제일 제가 가슴에 와닿게 막 이렇게 물론 좋은 사람도 많습니다. 그런데 그런데 좀 영구임대 아파트에 있으니까 좀 멀쌍식한 사람들도 많지만 그런 사람들 속에서 있잖아요. 그 옷이랑 한국 분들은 옷이랑 좀 좋은 것들 새 옷들도 이렇게 가방이랑 샀다가도 넷때리도 안 떼고 막 파는 거 있잖아요. 이렇게 막 버리고 가면 나오면서 있잖아요. 저것도 이북년이다. 이런 거 이북년 주자. 막 이렇게 하면서 그러니까 우리가 힘들고 정말 쌀밥 한 그릇 먹어보고 죽어도 원이 없겠다 이런 생각을 갖고 우리가 탈북을 떠나요. 가다가 죽겠는지 살겠는지 확신이 안 서잖아요. 그러면서 이렇게 피를 물고 왔는데 놈이 버리는 그런 거 쓰레기 같은 거를 탈북년들한테 이북년들이라 그래요. 이북년들한테 줘야 된다 이렇게. 그 다음에 이게 말이 다 틀려요. 뭐가 틀리냐? 우리는 돼지 발적이다 그래요. 한국은 아니죠. 북한은. 근데 여기는 돼지 족발이라 그러고 그 다음에 짐승도 몰이라 그러고 이런데 언어가 문화의 차이가 많이 그렇게 되어 있고 복지시설은 하나원에서 퇴소돼서 나오면서 6개월 동안을 생계비를 줘요. 살 수 있게끔. 왜? 누구나 브로커를 안 통하고 오지는 않았잖아요. 그러니까 브로커 비용이 저는 중국에서부터 한국까지 간 게 2천만 원이에요. 이렇게 다 각서 쓰고 사진 다 붙이고. 그런데 어떻게 알았는지 집에 밖으로 나오면 브로커들이 한 두세 명이 달려오거든요. 그렇게 해서 좀 깎아달라, 뭐 어떻게 해달라 하면서 그때 내가 2천만 원인데 하나원에서 나올 때 주는 거는 1,300만 원이거든요. 그럼 어떻게 주겠어요? 그러니까 이제는 하나원에서도 그거를 갈라줘요. 살 수 있게끔. 그렇게 하고 6개월을 생계비를 주고 그 다음에 내가 이거 한국 사회에 대해서 배워야 되잖아요. 그러니까 컴퓨터 학원도 다니고 그 다음에 운전면허증을 따야 되니까 거기도 다니고 요양보호사 자격증 다니고 이렇게 하면서 다니면 생계비는 계속 6개월이 지났어도 계속 유지해주고 그 다음에 자격증을 따면 저는 560만 원을 주더라고요. 자격증을 취득했다고. 한국 사람들은 아니잖아요. 그런 저거 혜택은 받았어요. 그런데 자격증을 따고 그 다음에 내려앉은 다음에부터는 취직이 안 되는 거예요. 엘리베이터나 무슨 지하철도 나와서 이 짝에 쭉 걸어 올라오는 거 나가는 데 있잖아요. 출구가. 그딴 데마다 알바 구합니다. 교포 대환영. 우리 교포 아니잖아요. 그러니까 저도 아르바이트를 하면서 전화를 해가지고 말씨가 이러니까 교포세요? 그래서 교포라고 그랬어요. 교포라고 그래야 일을 할 수 있거든요. 예. 그래서 그런 좀 차이점은 있고 지금은 남한하고 북한하고 지금 김정은이 하고 문재인이 하고 몇 번 만났잖아요. 그렇게 만난 다음에 문재인이는 이런 탈북자나 실향민에 대해서 한 번도 경고하지 않았어요. 그런데 김정은이는 여기를 이렇게 실향민이나 탈북자 가족이나 이 길을 자유롭게 오갈 수 있게 이렇게 앞으로 만들자 이렇게 했잖아요. 근데 그 시선을 한국 사람이 보는 견해에서는 통일이 빨리 오느나 통일이 금방 되는 것처럼 생각을 하고 있었어요. 하지만 우리 탈북자들이 우리가 보는 견해는 저게 자유롭게 오가는 게 아니고 탈북자들이 다 이제 잡아들일 수 있는 그런 위험감을 느꼈거든요. 그래서 제 주변에 있던 친구들도 많이 지금 다 한국을 떠나고 있거든요. 예, 지금 현 정세는 바로 그렇습니다.
So, when she arrives and finishing the Hanawan program, which is a re-education program mandatory for all the North Korean defectors coming to South Korea. After finishing the program, she basically the government mandatorily provide all the housing and everything, but the town itself, the town itself was not really say privileged. I would say. So low income families often get that kind of a mandatory housing. So the first thing that she noticed and really shocked her was the bias from the South Korean people. They really looked down on North Korean people, and which was really embarrassing and a really sad thing for her. And also, and as a North Korean defector, she basically crossed the river, crossed all through China in order to survive, whether not knowing, even not knowing whether she could make it or not. But now she thought that she could live in this country really freely and then with all the dignity. And when she kind of confronted that kind of bias, it really perplexed her or confused her. And also, there's a difference in language. Even though we say the same thing, similar things, but many of the little details, there are things that really let people distinguish from South Korean people and North Korean defector, and which really sometimes really hard to overcome. And in terms of social welfare, social protection, South Korean government is kind of generous to provide all that resettlement funding, resettlement support to North Korean defectors, and often before. South Korean government gave all that resettlement support, financial support at one time, just one-time payment of that money. But later they found out that when these North Korean defectors are resettled, the brokers, they got help from to cross the North Korea-China border as well as the China to South Korea. When these brokers found out that these people got out from Hanawon, they basically came to get their share, because these North Korean rarely North Korean defectors have that money to pay broker in advance. So they have to basically they have a contract like I'm gonna pay back to you when I safely make to South Korea. So as soon as they got out of Hanawon, they got a call, and sometimes broker came to visit them and basically asked for their share. So when they found out, South Korean government decided to basically split that money so that they are not be deprived by this broker. So. And also education, all the education and all the fee or the fee to get a certain certificate or degrees or even getting a driver's license, all that money is actually for free for North Korean defectors. So it's the protection or support system in South Korea works really well in terms of government. But when even though you have that kind of a protection system, when you actually out there in the South Korean society, still there's prejudice and bias against these people, these North Korean defectors. That's the hardest thing. Even when she wants to have a part-time job in some kind of restaurant, they are many of the South Korean people, somehow business owners, looking for try to hire Korean prefer Korean Chinese rather than North Korean defector. We don't know why. So when she tried to apply for some kind of a part-time job. She talked to, and she was on the phone for an interview, and this owner asked her whether she's a Korean Chinese. So she just basically lied to him that I'm Korean Chinese in order to get that job. So that kind of thing is really hard for North Korean defectors to overcome in terms of resettling into South Korean society. And one other thing she mentioned is that when we are talking about peace, and then when there was a inter-Korean summit happened, Kim Jong-un actually mentioned that we're gonna make this road as a road of peace, so that can whether it's North Korean defector or those who came from whose hometown is in North Korea, we can just let them just walk peacefully to come to visit their hometown. South Korean people are so really excited about that issue, saying that comment saying that we're going to have a peace in our time, but how North Korean defectors saw that comment was totally different. They basically take that as an intimidation or threat from Kim Jong-un, saying that we're gonna go down there and get you and drag you through this road. So that's how North Korean defectors saw that, interpreted the comment. And it's basically give a lot of fear. It saw a lot of fear within North Korean defector community. So there's after the summit, actually, many North Korean defectors decided to immigrate to other countries rather than South Korea.
Does Spark want to add anything? Okay, we are going to get ready to start our second panel, and one quick thing to tell you is if you're interested in the North Korea Freedom Coalition, we do have member forums. We are a nonpartisan organization that we have high school students to senior citizens, people from South Korea, the US, all over the world, NGOs, individual members, and we're all united to promote the freedom, human rights, and dignity of the North Korean people. And we'd love to have anybody who'd be interested in joining. We will have member forums, but our website is www.nkfreedom.org. And our next panel, we don't want you to leave without coming up with some practical ideas and discussion. We're really honored to have the executive director of the premier organization, I think, in the world, certainly in the United States of America, as far as documenting the human rights violations that are happening in North Korea, who is the executive director of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. But I'm going to turn it over to Jason West, who is the vice chairman of the North Korea Freedom Coalition, who heads the working group on North Korean women, who's going to introduce the next panel. Jason is also filling in for Ann Buwalda, who is supposed to be here as one of our expert witnesses to talk about solutions, but he's going to cover her testimony for us. So I'm going to hand it over to Jason. Thank you so much. Get out of your way. Step over here.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I have the pleasure of introducing our next panel, who I also will be speaking alongside. As Suzanne said, my co-chair with our working group is not able to be here today, Ann Buwalda, so I'll be speaking on behalf of her. I actually am not sure that's necessary because after this first panel, they had wonderful recommendations right there. So I think number one recommendation is just listen to what these ladies have to say, which consequently is the theme of North Korea Freedom Week, which is coming up soon at the end of April. The theme is listen to the defectors, and then you'll know the truth. And I'm sure Suzanne will want to wrap up and say something at the end about that. But real quick, I did just want to comment on Greg Scarlatoiu is the executive director of HRNK, as Suzanne mentioned. HRNK was founded in 2001 by a group of human rights and foreign policy specialists to focus on the situation in North Korea. They have over 28 publications, 28 and counting. 35, so it is over 28, I was right. I took that from your bio, so.
Got updated.
Yeah. They're frequently quoted by the media, both Greg and the organization and their reports, and most recently by the State Department as well. 17 times, was it? Yes, so a very well-respected organization, as Suzanne mentioned. And then I will be speaking on behalf of Ann Buwalda, who is executive director of the Jubilee Campaign, and is an immigration attorney specializing in refugee and asylum law, who I have the pleasure of working alongside and also working for her with her law firm. Jubilee Campaign was founded by Ms. Buwalda in 1991 to promote human rights and religious freedom of ethnic and religious minorities around the world, including in North Korea. So I will turn it over to Greg now for his comments.
Thank you very much, Jason and Suzanne. Factually, there is very little to add to what our two witnesses have shared with you already. I would like to remind you that they're both very accomplished individuals. They have refused to be defined by the trauma they experienced. Imagine how difficult it would be for any of us to visit the most traumatizing times of our lives, especially when the traumatizing time was represented by 28 years lived in a political prison camp. My intention today is to tell you just a very little bit about how we basically operationalize the testimony we receive from our wonderful witnesses. Our methodology comprises a combination of satellite imagery analysis, in particular when we look at North Korea's vast system of unlawful imprisonment, and testimony received from witnesses such as our two distinguished witnesses today. Our organization received UN consultative status in April of last year, almost a year ago. This was a small miracle, courtesy of former US Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and Kelly Curry, who was then Ambassador to ECOSOC. We have subsequently submitted to the Universal Periodic Review of North Korea at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Universal Periodic Review. Most countries, all countries are under review. They receive a set of questions from other member states. They respond during the next cycle. So we are participating in the process of analyzing the North Korean human rights situation and formulating recommendations to the government of the DPRK. Of course, it's not civil society, but member states that pick up these recommendations and direct them to the government of the DPRK. We looked at primarily 3 areas. All of them have been reflected in today's testimony. One is North Korea's political prison camp system. The other one is restrictions on freedom of movement. And the third one is, and this was mentioned, North Korea's Songbun system of social discrimination. This is a loyalty-based system that discriminates against the very people of North Korea. We all know that there are 120,000 people held at North Korea's political prison camps. Many others are held, many other political prisoners are held at other types of detention facilities, in particular the Kyohwa-so re-education through labor camps. One trend that we have identified under the Kim Jong-un regime in particular has been the disproportionate repression of women. Why? It's women who have assumed responsibility for the livelihoods of their families. It's the women who go to the markets to trade. It's the women who get arrested for perceived wrongdoing. It's the women who cross the border into China without government approval in search of opportunity for their families. They're arrested, forcibly returned by the Chinese government in direct violation of the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. Why is it a direct violation? Because according to the 1951 UN Convention concerning the status of refugees, if a person is returned to a place where he or she faces a credible fear of persecution, that person becomes réfugié sur place, a refugee on site who deserves access to the process leading to acquiring political refugee status. At one facility in North Korea, camp number 12, we have no time for satellite imagery today, I apologize, camp number 12 in Cheonggori, North Hamgyong province, 20% of the prisoners, 1,000 out of 5,000 are women. 800 out of 1,000, 80% of female prisoners are women arrested and forcibly returned by China. Thus, they qualify as political prisoners. Of course, they were victimized. They were, as you heard, they were victims of human trafficking. They were victims of refoulement. They were victims of subsequent torture, subsequent imprisonment inside camp number 12, and this is just one example. I'm going to move on very quickly because this does have to translate into action items. This does have to translate into recommendations. I'm going to sample some of the recommendations we formulated. Many of them, or all of them, have a direct impact on women in prison right now in North Korea. Accede to the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. When you are taken to the camp, this is an enforced disappearance. You disappear in the middle of the night, oftentimes together with members of your family, up to 3 generations of the same family. These camps, some of these camps have been moved inland, away from the border. Thousands of people have disappeared in the process. Thus, prisoners are subjected to a second enforced disappearance while imprisoned at the camps. Prohibit the use of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment as punishment for detainees, and ratify the Convention Against Torture and its optional protocol. Account for all missing persons, prisoners, and deceased prisoners, and provide their names and locations to their families and their respective states. Release the locations of detention facilities and implicitly acknowledge the existence of political prison camps in the DPRK to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. to the office in Seoul in particular. We know these locations, we have the satellite imagery, we have the witnesses, we know what's going on, we have been following developments for so many years. It is the government of the DPRK that would not acknowledge the existence of these unlawful detention facilities. Dismantle all political prison camps and unconditionally release all prisoners of conscience, including relatives being held on the basis of guilt by association, many of them women. Mrs. Kim Hae-suk was telling us in a prior meeting today that 60% of the prisoners at Camp 18 where she was held were women. Men are often killed in mining accidents. Institute protections against arbitrary detention that guarantee due process and fair trial rights. Take immediate action to cease the practice of forced labor, including in detention facilities. Educate and train officials, including prison guards and political officers, on international human rights standards and instruments, and increase the number of women guards. Very quickly, another point that we made was restrictions on the freedom of movement within the country and across the border. The vast majority, again, of those seeking to leave the country are women. They often become victims of sexual trafficking, violence, slavery, arbitrary detention, and torture at DPRK detention facilities. We have interviewed former prisoners who reported that they had to undergo hard labor, ideological training. As you have heard, those North Korean women, well, in so-called marriages in China with Chinese men, experience issues that clearly violate the rights to family, although the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society, entitled to protection by society and the state. Very quickly, pertaining to this area, 2 recommendations would be to acknowledge the right of all North Korean citizens to leave and return to their country without penalty, to freely move around within their own country, and to be able to freely choose their place of residence and employment. That is not the case in North Korea. You don't get to choose your place of employment. Your place of residence is assigned by the place of employment. And again, release from all detention facilities those who simply exercise their right to leave the country, and those who are forcibly repatriated, and waive all penalties against them. Finally, pertaining to the Songbun system of social classification. As you know, I'm sure many of you, this is a perceived loyalty-based system. North Koreans are classified into 3 main categories: core, wavering, hostile class, 20 to 25%, 40 to 60% wavering, 20 to 25% hostile. Yes, markets have developed for the past 20 years, and that's great, because fewer people depend on the public distribution system that weaponized food and daily necessities as a tool of social control. But women of lower Songbun who are active at the markets experience discrimination by women of higher Songbun, a very new type of oppression, if you will, that continues to be rooted in the fundamentals of North Korea. So recommendations pertaining to this rather unique system of social discrimination: end state-sponsored discrimination based on the Songbun system, revise North Korea's 10 commandments, the 10 principles of monolithic ideology, to conform to international human rights laws that the DPRK has ratified, commit greater resources to rebuilding the public health and primary health care infrastructure. You've heard a lot about that from the witnesses today. Increase investment in agricultural development and reforms, giving priority in particular to marginalized populations, to vulnerable populations, people in detention, mothers, children. And finally, grant access, extraordinarily important. Grant access to the International Committee of the Red Cross and UN humanitarian agencies to provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea's most vulnerable groups, including prisoners. We have been advocating for a human rights upfront approach. If the World Health Organization, for example, is active inside North Korea, the World Health Organization has a program called Health in Prisons that has been applied successfully elsewhere in the developing world. Why not seek access, for example, to North Korea's re-education through forced labor camps? We have pointed out the proximity of some fact-finding operations following flooding and other natural disasters, the proximity of such fact-finding operations to detention facilities where we documented the presence of political prisoners, women political prisoners in particular. Thank you, Jason. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So Ms. Bawalda, again, could not be here today, so I have some policy recommendations that she'd like me to relay to you all. Greg covered most of what we would recommend to the DPRK very well and in great detail, so our first recommendation will be to follow his recommendations. If we would just add for our recommendations to North Korea, we would simply sum it up as saying, respect basic human rights. Victims have described suffering that is simply wrong, and no country that wants to be a respected member of the international community shall allow, much less perpetrate, such despicable, evil treatment of individuals. But we also have recommendations to China and the international community, and also to you all and NGOs and civil society. So for China, we would recommend that they give North Koreans refugee status and access to the UNHCR and the international community. China classifies North Korean refugees as economic migrants and forcibly repatriates them to North Korea in violation of the Refugee Convention and Protocol, which they are subject to. So we would also say that this is the least burdensome refugee situation in the world when it comes to the nation-state side. All China has to do is allow North Korean refugees to go to South Korea. They are welcome in South Korea. The South Korean government recognizes them as citizens. It's a very unique refugee situation. And all countries that carry the burden of the refugee crisis around the world should pressure China to take this very basic step to allow North Korean refugees access to the UNHCR and the ability to go to South Korea, because unlike many other refugees, they do have a place to go. We would also recommend that China allow the children of North Korean refugees some form of legal status or, similarly, access to refugee protections. Right now, the children of North Korean refugees are, they fall through the cracks in China. They're not recognized by the Chinese government, and they do not have access to any basic protections in China. To the international community, we would recommend that the international community pursue a policy which allows for the region to stabilize and not simply deny the North Korean government access to nuclear missile capacity. Human rights generally are a pathway to freedom for refugees specifically, and is a key element of this. The Kim regime and their political philosophy depend on a pressure cooker mentality, where the only option for the North Korean people to better their lives, or even to survive, is to advance within the regime. The regime focuses its people's attention outward, leaving little possibility for reconciliation. The incredible danger and legal barriers to those who seek to escape from the murderous game being played by North Korea and the Kim family regime simply increases this pressure on the North Korean people. Therefore, ignoring this issue in human rights simply increases the destabilizing influences in the region. However, if a path to freedom is established, it will ease the pressure on the North Korean people, giving them an alternative to pursuing the Juche philosophy to its logical conclusion, which can only be war. This is not the only humanitarian duty of nations in the world, but it's good policy for those who do not want the region to dissolve into some kind of conflict. Currently, the narrative focuses so much on preventing nuclear weapons that at times it appears that we forget how dangerous and destabilizing a conventional war in this area would be. And lastly, to all of you here, to NGOs and civil society, first, as I began, we would recommend that you listen to the defectors. They are from there. They have witnessed this themselves, and they are the real experts, as Greg rightly pointed out. NGOs should include these recommendations that we've brought forward today and these testimonies wherever possible in their own work and their own interactions with the international community and nations around the world. Human rights should always be on the agenda. And lastly, as Suzanne said, you should definitely join the North Korea Freedom Coalition. We're a nonpartisan group of over 70 organizations around the world focusing on this multifaceted problem of North Korean human rights, and we need more people like you to be active in this and to raise the profile of North Korean human rights. So, in the little bit of time we have left, we have a few minutes, Greg and I would be happy to take your questions.
Yeah, Jason, can you tell us how many North Korean defectors globally? Canada, UK, Germany, Australia?
I mean, slightly over 32,000, I would say. Most of them are in South Korea. Greg, anything to add?
Yes, we could be somewhere close to 35,000, I guess, including the 31,500 in South Korea.
Yeah.
In that range.
Yep. Next question. Makes our job very easy. Suzanne, any questions?
I can ask you.
Oh, there
you can ask a question.
Well, as I said, we definitely, oh yes, please, go ahead.
If people know, is it that simple? Just if people know the truth, what's going on in North Korea, won't they take action? Won't they talk about it? And what's going on? What's the suppression? What's the problem? It's horrible, and it needs to just be known. So you go and you tell people. Is it as simple as that?
Well, I would say that's the first step, is letting people know what's going on in North Korea. But then we do have to continue with these sort of recommendations, encouraging nations, the international community, and other NGOs to take action on these things. So it's not just talking about it, but acting on these issues as well, too. Greg?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jason, and of course, these are very important issues. Competing for attention against other human rights crises, the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean basin, South Asia, other human rights crises all over the world. Of course, we've often been outcompeted by serious political, security, military concerns, North Korea's nukes and missiles. Awareness building is important. The UN is no silver bullet, but nevertheless, action at the UN through country-specific mechanisms, commissions of inquiry, special rapporteurs. We still have a special rapporteur on human rights in the DPRK. Also the UPR mechanism. This is all very important. Also the type of work that this organization does, Free North Korea Radio, information operations, true change can only come from the people of North Korea. It's important for us in the outside world to know and understand this information. It's even more important for the people of North Korea to know and understand their own human rights situation, the corruption of their own regime, and also the truth about the outside world, as a first step toward empowering them to enact change. And by that I don't mean bloodshed, I don't mean bloody revolutions, I just mean just that, enabling them to see beyond this extraordinarily repressive dictatorship and enact change.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do you support joint cooperation with North Korea and South Korea, like the Keystone industrial complex, or do you support the reunion of families?
Well, Greg is certainly more of the senior expert than I, so I will defer to him.
We are all unanimously in favor of peace, inter-Korean reconciliation, eventual Korean unification, of course, under a free, democratic, prosperous Republic of Korea. That said, of course, inter-Korean cooperation would make good sense. There is one big problem, and that is the fact that North Korea has been developing and is in possession of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. There are UN Security Council resolutions in place, resolutions that have enacted a sanctions regime that has two goals in mind. Number one, to to prevent the development and proliferation of North Korean nukes and missiles. Number two, to punish the elites in charge of this proliferation and development by severing their access to luxury goods from the outside world. The big concern here is that by resuming inter-Korean economic cooperation, while North Korea is still developing its nukes and missiles, much or all of this funding would be channeled precisely toward the development of those weapons capabilities. So the future is bright. South Korea surely has the will, the know-how, the capital. North Koreans are very entrepreneurial and talented people, educated people. They can make progress very fast. But there is this hurdle that has to be cleared, and there is another very important hurdle that has to be cleared: human rights. You cannot run humanitarian even or development projects in a country that's committing crimes against humanity. You cannot run a water and sanitation project next to a political prison camp. The same is true of the Kaesong industrial complex. There are documented severe labor rights violations, wage and payment violations. So these two hurdles have to be cleared, and I think that we unanimously believe that the future of a unified Korean peninsula will be bright.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. Suzanne, did you have any closing words? Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, gentlemen, for your remarks. I'm just going to close by telling you that we are having a North Korea Freedom Week is coming up at the end of April. It's an event that we do every year. It flips between Seoul and Washington, D.C. This year it's going to be Washington, D.C. We're hoping to actually do something up in New York during that week. It's the end of April, April 28th through May 4th. The whole week is devoted to showcasing the North Korean people and giving them a chance to speak out. The theme this year is listen to the North Korean defectors, then you'll know the truth. But in answer to your question, which I just want to add something to that, we absolutely believe that the flow of information is critical to changing the hearts and minds of the people of North Korea. They're so isolated, they're so prevented from understanding what's going on in the outside world. And we absolutely believe that we have to talk about the human rights and our care and concern for them. The reason why Kim Jong-un justifies the nuclear program and all the diversion of support that could go to the people of North Korea is because he says that the United States is their enemy and wants to destroy them. You have to sacrifice, we have to develop nuclear weapons because it's the only way we can survive. This is the brainwashing that goes on, and we have to talk about human rights and talk about the fact that actually Americans, South Koreans, the world community cares very deeply for the people of North Korea. That's what we need to communicate. And just to underscore this, I mentioned the young lady who fled Pyongyang, who got to a detention center in Thailand and was shocked to find out that her fellow female citizens were being trafficked. She had no idea because she had a life of privilege. She also told me that when Kim Jong-il died, she thought she was going to die because he was their God. And when their God died, their family was like, why are we still here? That's how brainwashed and cut off they are. So it's really important to also focus attention on not only just talking about these problems, but reaching out to the people of North Korea to tell them how much we really care about them and doing all we can to promote their human rights and to get information into North Korea. So our coalition is also involved. You mentioned that Free North Korea Radio is one of the member NGOs of the coalition, broadcasting to North Korea every day. It's a radio station that's staffed by North Korean defectors, but we also involved with rice bottle launches, balloon launches, smuggling things over the border, any way that we can communicate to the people of North Korea. So anyway, thank you very much again for coming out. And Chloe's got membership forms if you're interested in joining the coalition. But thank you to Greg and Jason for giving us some great guidelines and some action items. And God bless you all for being here. And Mrs. Kim and Ms. Park, could you stand? Let's give them a special round of applause. Thank you.